Good morning, Astro friends. I'm glad that you're all here today for our half-hour lesson called Constellations and Planets, the Story of the Night Sky. I thought that we could all use something different to do in the middle of this lockdown quarantine stuff, and I'm really happy that we can do it together. The human race has never looked at a sky unspangled with stars. Just like when you first saw the stars, our ancestors too were fascinated and wondered what they could be. One big difference between your observations of the sky and theirs is that they looked at the stars longer and far more often. Before electricity and all the distractions and entertainment that it allowed us, our ancestors had little to do at night besides look up at the sky or sleep. They had no lights to read by or games to play, no TV, no computers, no music players, just the panoply of stars. Most of us who are passionate about the sky would like to be able to point out the planets and constellations to our friends and family at any given time. But, it can prove difficult. I mean, how can you keep track of everything? It all moves. Well, I'll tell you, here's the trick. Find the planet or constellation once, and then follow it through the sky every night. It doesn't move that much each night. Once you've found it, just notice it every night when you go outside to the car or to take the trash out or bring the dog a blanket. The planets move and the constellations change with the seasons, but if you find them just once and notice them each night, you won't lose track of them. A second helpful hint when trying to learn the constellations is to pick an easily recognizable one and use it as your starting point to find all the rest. You might start with one that you're already familiar with, like the constellation Orion. It's an easy winter constellation to find with its telltale three stars in a row for the belt. In the summer, you may want to start with the Big Dipper, easy to see in the sky. The word constellation just means an arrangement of stars. There are 88 constellations, and they were named by the Greeks and Romans, and we've adopted those names as kind of the standard today. Though many other cultures had their own names for the imagined shapes in the sky. The constellations were named hundreds of years ago and have not been updated by modern astronomers. The vast majority of these constellations are not easily recognizable in modern skies by any but the most devout observers. Perhaps you should lead a campaign to identify constellations with modern meanings, like the Space Shuttle constellation or the Oprah Winfrey constellation. Hundreds of years ago, people would sit or lay outside for many hours, and because there was no light pollution or smog, the stars appeared brighter than they do today. Our ancestors made up stories about the stars and imagined what they seemed to form. Humans are wired to recognize patterns, and stars seem to form pictures from our perspective. Much like you watching the clouds go by and saying, that looks like George Washington, or that one looks like the car I want. These ancient people saw the heroes of their day performing throughout the night as the stars moved across the sky, and new ones followed them up from the horizon. One would think that it might be nice to start over with more modern constellation names because some of the old ones are pretty outdated, like Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, or Auriga, the charioteer. But would modern names and occupations really be an improvement? How about Jim, the car salesman, or Hannah, the optician? Eh, we might as well leave them as they are. You may notice that you see different constellations during the summer than you do in the winter. This is simply because your view from the Earth changes as the planet revolves around the sun. Pretend your line of sight in the night sky is one of the arrows in this picture, and you can see how the sky would look differently based on where the Earth is in its journey around the sun each year. The people of old imagined that the earth was surrounded by a celestial sphere, or what they called a heavenly circle. Now, this is not accurate, but imagining the sky as a hollow globe of stars that spins around the earth is extremely helpful in picturing where the constellations are and how they move. Most objects in our sky appear to rise somewhere in the eastern horizon and set somewhere in the western horizon. The horizon is an imaginary horizontal line lying at eye level in all directions from you. From wherever you are standing, 90 degrees directly overhead or up from the horizon is considered your zenith. These are two important words to know when you're trying to find something in the night sky: horizon and zenith. Much of what the sky looks like to us is based on our perspective. Perspective is how we see things from our own vantage point. The vast majority of the stars that make up each of the constellations are not actually close to one another in space. They only look related from our perspective. In about 30,000 years, these stars will no longer form the constellations that we see now because they are moving in different directions. This is the constellation Cassiopeia. The actual picture is how we see the stars from the Earth. The drawing depicts where the stars are actually located in space in relation to one another. To find constellations and planets, you need to know a few basic things about where you are on the Earth. Which way are you facing? North, south, east, or west? Just get an inexpensive compass and it will tell you right away. Where are you? You need to know your location on the Earth, expressed in terms of longitude and latitude. Longitude is a number that expresses your location horizontally on the planet, and latitude expresses your location vertically. More simply, most star finders can give you a picture of your night sky just by putting in the nearest big city to you. It is really figuring out the longitude and latitude of the city for you, and you won't have to do it. What do you think the effects of city lights are on how well you can see constellations? If you guess that light hurts your ability to see constellations, you guessed correctly. Which sky do you have based on this picture? Another factor affecting the clarity of the night sky is something called airglow. The sky has a base and natural glow caused by ultraviolet radiation from the sun, which excites the gases in the Earth's atmosphere and makes the sky glow a bit. There are 12 constellations of the zodiac. The astronomical significance of the zodiac is that these are the 12 constellations that the sun appears to pass through as the Earth rotates around it over the course of the year. Many of the most recognizable star patterns are actually just parts of larger constellations called asteroms. For example, the Big Dipper is really just a recognizable part of the Great Bear constellation, also known as Ursa Major. Ursa meaning bear, major meaning large. The Big Dipper is a pointer constellation to the North Star, which is the star that comes closest to representing exact north. The North Star is also the tip of the handle for the Little Dipper, which is part of the larger constellation Ursa Minor, or the Little Bear. So you can start to see here that if you can find one constellation or astrum like the Big Dipper, you can start to learn the rest of the sky based on that. The North Star is the 15th brightest star in the sky, not the brightest star as is often thought. but it is the only visible star to match very closely with the Earth's North Pole. If the North Star appears above your favorite tree in the backyard, it will always be exactly there. You can move out, get married, have kids, and come back and stand on your back porch, and the North Star will still be there. It doesn't move in the sky, so it's a great place to start finding it each night. The night sky is full of stories. There is a story that tells of Zeus, who was the ruler of the sky, and he wanted to add bears to the heavens. So Zeus went out into the woods and found a bear and a cub, who would become Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. However, when he tried to pick them up by their feet, their claws scratched him. When he tried to pick them up by their heads, the bears bit him. So he grabbed them by their tails and flung them into the sky. That's why the bears in the sky have long tails, unlike the bears on the earth. Once you have located the Big Dipper, a relatively easy find, you should be able to spot the Little Dipper and the Pole Star. And let's add a new constellation to that, Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia is easy to see because the brightest stars in the constellation form kind of a W. To our forefathers and mothers, Cassiopeia looked like a vain queen sitting on a throne, bragging about her beauty. You may notice that the bright stars that make up the W in Cassiopeia can be right side up or a little bit on their side, and that just depends on the time of year and where you live on the Earth. Can you notice a difference in the slant of the W in the picture of the Queen Cassiopeia and in the line drawing below it? At this point, you should be able to find the Big Dipper, the North Star, which is Polaris, Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, the Big and Little Bear, and the constellation Cassiopeia. And you've done that just by building on the Big Dipper. A magnificent object in Cassiopeia that can be seen in a very dark sky without a telescope is the great galaxy Andromeda. You can use the bottom star in the W shape as a pointer to our neighboring galaxy. Orion also serves as kind of the home for several interesting phenomena. Orion's shoulder star, Betelgeuse, is a red giant. A red giant is a very large but thinly spread out star in the last stages of existence. It is large, red, and cool. The middle star in Orion's knife is actually the beautiful and recognizable Orion Nebula, which can be seen without a telescope in a fuzzy cloud. Finally, Orion boasts the Horsehead Nebula. Got thrown off there, got a little phone call. Finally, Orion boasts the Horsehead Nebula, just under the leftmost star in his belt. This is not easily seen with the naked eye. It's without a telescope. So whereas you can use the Big Dipper as your starter constellation in the winter, the constellation Orion could be your starter constellation in the summer because it's very easy to find with its telltale 3 stars in a row for the belt. We cannot leave the mighty constellation Orion just yet. Betelgeuse, sometimes pronounced Betelgeuse, is just about the largest single thing that you can see. If it was plopped into the middle of our solar system, it would extend out past the orbit of Mars. It can be seen from any location on Earth except if you were standing on one of the poles, and it's bright enough to cut through even the brightest city sky. Here's a drawing of Orion with some perspective and its surrounding constellations. Notice that the 4 zodiac constellations, remember that the zodiac just refers to constellations that the sun appears to travel through during the year. Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, doesn't have any mystical meaning. Orion is just out of the plane of the ecliptic, which is where the sun passes. However, it's related. Pleiades is another beautiful and easy to find thing in the sky. It's a condensed, or close together, cluster of bright blue, hot young stars. And if you notice, uh, it's easy to mistake the Pleiades cluster for the Little Dipper if you're looking at the sky. It's a little, and it does look like a dipper. The famous and easy to see cluster is also known as the Seven Sisters, as there are seven bright stars in the formation. If you can find the very noticeable Orion constellation, you can find the Seven Sisters as well. Notice Orion is to the left, the Seven Sisters off to the right. Again, we're trying to build on the constellations we know and go out from there to find other constellations and interesting things like the Andromeda Galaxy and the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades. The stars of the Pleiades are named after the daughters of Atlas, who supposedly holds the world on his back, yet still found time to start a family. Look at this cluster with binoculars, and you will enjoy it in full splendor. You can see it with naked eye too, and you don't want to use a telescope because a telescope would only focus in on one of the seven stars. Now, as you take a closer look, you'll see that there are clearly more than seven stars here, but with the naked eye, only six are easily seen. So why have they always been called the Seven Sisters? Well, one theory is that one of the stars has died out since it was first named the Seven Sisters. It's helpful to lump related figures together in your mind. For example, it makes sense that Orion, the hunter here at the top right, would be followed by his faithful dog, Canis Major, who might be chasing a rabbit, Lepus. Make it a story and it will be easier for you to remember and find. Do you want to hear another story? The sky is full of them. Orion, the big smelly hunter, liked the Pleiades sisters, and there were seven of them. The ladies of the Pleiades did not like Orion back, but back in those days there was nothing to stop Orion from forcing the Pleiades sisters to marry him. So the beautiful Pleiades sisters appealed to Zeus, who, as you might remember, is in charge of the sky in the story. Zeus had sympathy for the sisters and placed Taurus the bull forever between the amorous hunter and the Pleiades sisters. Even Orion, the mighty hunter, had to think twice before fighting the bull to get to the ladies of the Pleiades. Since we are near the edge of our galaxy in the Milky Way, we can see much of the galaxy in our night sky. It may look at first glance like a thin cloud spanning half the night sky, but on closer examination, it is our densely packed group of stars that make up our galaxy. Can you guess why it's called the Milky Way? Well, it looks like someone spilled milk across the night sky. Now, of course, the darker the sky, the easier this is to see. But even in moderately dark skies, you can see the Milky Way. Notice that if you're looking for the Milky Way, you can find Cassiopeia, the W constellation, and you'll notice that it's right inside the Milky Way, and that will help you find it. Well, we've been talking about Orion. Your eye may have wandered down the horizon and to the left and spotted an extremely bright star. This star is Sirius, and it's the brightest star in the night sky, nearly 4 times brighter than its closest competitor, and it's known as the Dog Star. If you're a fan of Harry Potter, Harry's uncle Sirius can change into a dog. If you have Sirius satellite radio, you'll notice that the logo is a dog. If you can catch Sirius rising through the thick horizon at sunset, it will likely look like it's changing color, and it can be very beautiful. And you can find it because you know how to find Orion. And you'll know that the bright star kind of beneath it to the left is Sirius. And make sure you tell the story of Sirius, the dog, chasing Lepus, the rabbit. So, one way to learn the night sky is when we relate new information to old information. This is called strata learning. If you can learn one thing and add something to it, it's more of a very natural way we learn. So, if you're interested, I can give you charts like this, like of the summer sky and of the winter sky, and you can build your story around the characters here. Now, it may be best to use some of the stories that I've told you because they're actually the stories that kind of these constellations came together in. But even better, you make up your own story because that's how you're most likely going to remember it. Just send me an email or post something on the Facebook chat here, and I will give you these charts and you can build your stories around them. Just like our ancestors, you can see 5 planets in the night sky without even using a telescope: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The picture on the left shows all but Jupiter and actually in the night sky. It looks like, I don't know, it might be over Los Angeles or something. The projected picture on the right shows what all the visible planets will look like on a rare night in the year 2040. How old will you be when this happens? The planets don't move in precession like the constellations because they are much closer to us and they move in an elliptical or oblong circle orbit around the sun like we do. It's no wonder that our ancestors named these objects wanderers. The word planet means wanderer. Mercury looks like a dim star with your naked eye or with a telescope, and it will only be around a few short hours at sunset or sunrise. The picture on the right is what the Earth and Moon look like from Mercury, taken from one of our spacecrafts. In the sky, without the aid of a telescope, Venus often is by far the brightest star in the sky in the early evening or early morning. With a small and inexpensive telescope, you can see that Venus actually goes through phases like the Moon because it is closer to the Sun than we are. Venus is so bright that you can even see it while the sun is up. Venus is very bright in the sky because it is surrounded by thick clouds, and the sun's light bounces off the clouds and into space, making it much brighter than it would otherwise be without the clouds. Even without a telescope, you can see that Mars is red. With a telescope, you can see dark markings on the surface, and sometimes you can see some ice caps on the northern and southern poles. The dark and changing markings are from sandstorms on the surface of Mars. Without a telescope, Jupiter is often one of the top 3 brightest objects in the sky. But with a telescope, you can quickly see gas bands on the planet as well as 4 moons of Jupiter. One of the interesting things about watching Jupiter from night to night is that the moons clearly change position each night, sometimes hiding behind the planet, sometimes moving to the other side, but every night this will look different. These moons, obviously orbiting Jupiter, changed humanity's belief that the Earth was the center of all motion in the universe. Let me go back to that one more second. You can see the 4 moons of Jupiter on a dark night without a telescope. If you have young, sharp eyes, I've been out with kids who can definitely see them, and I've tested them. I said, "Well, how many moons are on one side? How many on the other?" So if you've got sharp eyes in a dark night, you can see these without a telescope. You can see them pretty easily through binoculars too. You just need to be able to hold the binoculars perfectly still. So you can rest them on top of a car roof or maybe a picnic table, and even those of us with weaker eyes will see them through binoculars. And a telescope is best, but you don't need much. You don't need much magnification to see them. Saturn's rings are not visible without a telescope, but they do substantially contribute to how bright the ringed planet looks in the sky. They do this by causing Saturn to be more reflective than it would normally be, acting in a similar way to Venus's clouds. With a small telescope, you can see the rings of Saturn. Depending on the Earth's position in relation to the ringed planet, the rings can look very different. To the right, this is an actual picture of Saturn next to our moon. There are thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth, so you've probably seen some in the night sky and not realized it. When you are waiting for your turn to look through the telescope or binoculars, as well as maybe waiting for a meteor shower, you can kill some time in a fun way by looking for satellites. They can look like high flying aircraft. The trick is the satellite won't have a blinking light like an airplane would be. You don't need very dark skies to see them, and they're very common, so you have no excuses. If you want some tips as to spotting satellites in the sky, again, send me an email and I'll send you our tip sheet for satellite spotting. Finally, the key to knowing your way around the night sky and showing others where things are anytime you want is to follow it every night. If you take the time to find the constellation or planet just once, then check on it every night just for a few seconds. You'll never lose track of your favorite objects, and when you want to show them off to someone, you'll know exactly where they are. In addition to that, once you find an easy to find constellation, add it to the nearby constellations and then build on it until you've become familiar with most of the night sky. It doesn't take more than a few weeks. Thank you for sharing this time together with me.